think about Avid as something that is a school-wide resource and as a school-wide approach. And some of the things that Avid presents here is these are things that we already know, but with a different name. Like much of everything in education, people come up with these great ideas, and it's nothing else but something else that worked in the past. They just tweak it and rename it. So we're going to be seeing some of that in a minute. So we have some norms. Just ask questions, be engaged, be open, and utilize what we are using. So our learning objective today, so we're going to discuss this note-taking process, and we're going to focus on this 5 steps that Avid has suggested, and we're going to, most of the people in this room right now are science, and I know that there are other classes in here. It applies to everybody, but since I am science driven, I will probably make some comments on how this relates to our science classes as much as I can, because I think there is a lot of correlations in there, but I also don't want my fellow teachers that are not science to feel like I'm isolating them, so bear with me. So what is the essential question? What is it that we're driving towards today? Is how do these 5 phases of focused note-taking support the processing and retention of important content? Well, how many of you get this problem in class sometimes? You teach something, and you spend the whole class teaching it, and you go over the concept with the kids, and the next day you're like, okay guys, you remember what we did yesterday? I was like, no? And you give them a warm-up, a do now, or like a little quiz or something, repeating the same thing that they just did yesterday. And they're like, I don't remember any of this. And you are like frustrated because they just don't remember any of the stuff. And it's a frustrating thing. And what we're going to discuss today too is what research says about note-taking and memory. And we're not going to dive a lot into it, but we're going to mention a few things from research. So, in your table, just take a couple of minutes to answer these 2 questions. Is note-taking important for our students to learn? Do you think that they should learn note-taking strategy? Is it important for us to teach them how to take notes? Or do we assume right away that they know how to take notes and we'll say, hey, here's the worksheet, take notes. Here's the textbook, let's take notes. Should we model that for them? What do we want our students to do with the notes once they have them? Okay, so take a couple of minutes to answer this in your table.
I don't like Monday. This is the way he wants to do it, but I think you should model the students that you try to yeah, so I think
like it's right here. Right. I mean, it's guided. It's walking you through what I'm going through at the time. So I don't know what I don't do. But I think because they are guided, I think also sometimes because give them the guided notes, but it's like they don't know how to take notes. So if we don't give them, if we don't tell them to take notes, they won't. They'll have nothing. But that doesn't give them guided notes. They don't pay as much attention to it. Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm just looking for the money. What I guess I'm just saying. I'm always that what's this one? What's this one? But you're not reading the syntax. You're not reading
I just feel like
Reading over the notes that same thing. I
All right. All right, can I have an attention? All right, eyes on me, please. Thanks. Let's wrap it up for a sec. And let's hear, I heard a lot of good conversations in different tables, so does anybody wants to share what you guys discussed in your table? Anybody in the table? Oh, that's on. Yes.
Okay, so we discussed the importance of taking notes now, especially because our students during the pandemic, you know, a lot of them were digital or hybrid learners, so they didn't learn how to take notes properly when they were in middle school. They're accustomed to, you know, just seeing it on a whiteboard or projected somewhere, or a teacher writes it on something, and they write down exactly everything they see, and they're not interpreting the information before they write it down. They're not doing anything to retain it except to copy it word for word.
Right.
So it is important for our students to learn how to take notes and to use those notes effectively so that they can refer to them when it's time.
Absolutely. Anybody else? All right. So you are so right. Note taking, it's a skill. I mean, it takes some practice. Like I told you, I didn't learn how to take notes until I was a brand new teacher, and I was taught how to use Cornell notes, and I had to learn how to do that because the training that I had was very technical, more so than how to put those thoughts into a paper.
Can I just ask a question? So how were you able to be successful academically if you were just taking notes? Like you were taking notes at some point during school, like you
In college?
Yeah.
No, it was all heavy book and problems and
But you had to take notes to do the problems, didn't you? You wrote something down. Yeah.
no, I did, but
Right.
never, okay, so when I said, I never sat down to take the definitions of speed, velocity, acceleration. We never sat down to write those definitions down in college. We never did that. We solved problems, and it was heavy math. And in math, it was just solving problems. But when I see our students, for example, and when I see my kids, I say, okay, we need to figure out how to understand these concepts. So we go over those definitions, and then they take notes about the definition. And that's something that I didn't do. And I didn't get the tools on how to do it properly. But like I say, it's a skill. Just like when you do a sport, you have to practice it from very young age until you become an expert at it. And there are some people who are very proficient at taking notes. But one thing that just got my attention when I was preparing for this is that it takes 15 years. It takes 15 years for the kids to learn how to take notes. And here's what I did. I assumed that they knew how to take notes in the classroom. Have you ever made that assumption? Just say, hey, here, guys, here's the textbook, or here's my PowerPoint, or here are my guided notes. And then we assume that they know how to take notes, and the reality is that some of them are not prepared. And talking about the pandemic, we have students who are ill prepared. So what I thought about was, okay, so what is our population student? If this is true, we need 15 years to learn how to take notes. What is our population? So our population of students look like this. We have 32% of our ninth graders who are below grade level in reading. And these graphs are not new to you. You already know that half of our students are not performing at grade level. And we have students that are reading at the very elementary grade levels. So they are not ready. They don't have those skills. So it is not okay to assume that they know how, okay? And they are in special ed. I'm sure that they do the modifications on how to take notes, and they have to think through a different lens on how to present the students with the information when it comes to taking notes. In our MI, this applied only for ninth graders. They come with huge deficits also in mathematics. But I thought to bring this also because I think this is relevant. I was looking at the data for our transient students. So this data is from last year. Last year we have a range anywhere between 29 and 32% of our students are transient. So we have kids that come and go, and we don't know if they have been trained or not. And they can come for a semester and they are gone the next semester, and we get what we get, right? So we need to be prepared for that, for the fact that our students don't know what to take. Some of them might not know, and we need to be able to know which students we have in our classroom that they can, and the ones that cannot take notes. And that's where differentiation takes place, and it's important, okay? So what Albert suggests is a process. It's a 5-step process. First is when you take the notes, you need to be able to process those notes. What do the students do to process the notes? How do they connect to their thinking, what they're using? Do they get to summarize and reflect on what they have been learning? And are they applying what they're learning? So now, look at this this process of 5 points for note taking. Can you relate any of that in the content that you teach? Again, I'm going to the science. In science, does this somehow relate to what we do in science?
Very much.
Very much. How about in art and any other content? I know that we have special ed and PE.
I mean, outdoor education, because, like right now, we're doing travel classroom, so that's almost a science subject. So, yeah, especially when it comes to stuff like that, taking notes is important. And so I kind of just give them the terms and say, this is what we're going over today. And one thing I do is, I only give them the terms for that day's lesson. I don't give them like a whole slew of terms.
Right.
So we'll just do like we'll pick out 5 terms, we'll go over those 5 things that day. They'll take notes, stuff like that.
All right, so this process applies to what you already do in the classroom and applies to your content. I'm gonna skip through this because we don't have the time. So I'm gonna go over the first phase. And the first phase is share with the students, why are we learning this? What is the essential question? What does that sound like for what we already are required to do in our classrooms? Our learning targets, right? We need to set to when we start our lesson with our learning targets, the students already know why we're learning the vocabulary that we're learning, because we have a learning target that we are aiming at. So this is, and I like what you said, that instead of giving the student, okay, here's a 50 words that we're gonna learn throughout the unit. I don't know if you do this or not, but if you give them a 50 vocabulary words in a unit, and they have to take notes on that entire block, then it kind of gets diluted because your learning target is only addressing probably 5 or maybe 3 of those vocabulary words. All right? So taking notes is important. It is important to let the students know why we're doing this and the reason why we're doing it. And then there's the best format. I just said that Cornell Notes is something that I learned, but there are many, many different formats of notes. And what I did is that when I went to the, I was talking to Mr. Vijay, the director for Avid, and so he provided me with a bunch, like lots and lots and lots of resources from Avid. I created a OneNote for our school called Avid South Cobb High School, and I will share at the end of this. At the end of the day, I'll share with the whole staff, and you can click in there, and I selected for writing. You click on that section of writing, and I put all the different strategies that are there. You see, instead of just going one strategy at a time, that we did that in years past, which is great, what we're concentrating is in the process right now, and the formats you can get from that OneNote. And if you have any questions on how to apply those particular formats of Avid, we have expert teachers here who have been trained on that, like Ms. Egger and Ms. Harrison have been trained on Avid, and Ms. Span, anybody else who have been trained in Avid. All right, and Mr. Joseph has also been trained in Avid, and we can provide you with those resources. All right, so at the end, you'll be able to paraphrase at the end of this first phase, is making sure that the students are able to paraphrase what they're learning. I can define velocity. I can explain blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this is basically what we went over. Educators should be able to communicate the purpose of note-taking. I'm gonna skip through that, and these are the different formats that we will provide, that we have provided for you in that OneNote that we will share. Okay, I'm gonna skip through this. This is what I think is very interesting. When you take notes, this take time. It should be done when you require the students to process what they have learned from the note taking. There is a period of time, and the science of different studies have analyzed the retention that the students have when they see something new. And I'm going to show you a video about that. Just give me 1 second. Find the video.
Did you know that the brain is designed to forget things, which makes learning new information really hard? The focused note-taking process makes learning stick. A landmark study done in the 1880s found that people forget along a predictable curve. In an hour, you will forget more than half of what you've learned. A day later, you will only remember a third. And it just keeps getting worse from there. The focused note-taking process is designed to help you remember what you've learned. The secret is repetition. Interacting with your notes within 18 minutes will boost your recall from 55% to 100%. Revisiting your notes within 1 day increases your learning from 70% back to 100%. Notice the curve of forgetting changes dramatically after every interaction with your notes. Complete 5 repetitions, and the information is all but cemented in your brain.
So would you agree with that? So, when you process these notes, so in your tables, what do you do in your classes to help improve the students' rate of forgetting? What is it? So now we see what the research says, and here's the graph, which basically says that after 20 minutes, you have forgotten about 58% of the material that you have seen. In 20 minutes, they have forgotten the stuff that you've seen. So what do you do in your class to help the students retain that? So I'll give you a couple of minutes to share in your table and comment on this information.
So actually try to use
So for us, we
learn how to
after we start our notes, talk about it. I will go over like different scenarios with the sport. Teach them a lot of what we learn in recreation. They have to learn the rules and regulations of the sport. They also have rights to sport. So it's a good thing for us is that we do a lot of stuff outside. So we'll take them outside and we'll play for right. We'll play shuffle.
learning scientists.
They also learn about the athletes, winning and going to they don't even know how the tournament works. Okay, I lost all this again. Okay, well, sometimes there's nothing per hour. Sometimes there's losing. Some different things like that. But yeah, I think for us, we definitely use it. We'll take what we just talked about and put it and take them outside so we can actually see how
That's kind of what
I know the science is really hard. I like But that's good because know, for me, it was me reading something and then me doing something else. So I understood more.
I come up with mine and I come up with
All right, can I get you back again?
Can't show them, they gotta read, they gotta read.
Let me get you back real quick. All right, so, does anybody want to share what you guys talked about in your tables? Volunteer? Go ahead.
So there's this website called learningscientist.org that they have countless colleges, come up with learning strategies. So I use some of those. One of them will be elaboration. So you give them a piece of it and then you tell them, okay, now tell me more of what will fill the blank. So get them to think about that concept. If you get them to get to a conclusion themselves, they will remember it better. So yeah, that's one that I would like to share with all of you. learningscientist.org. It's a great website, great resource.
All right. Anybody else? So what do you do specifically in class? What strategies do you use to reinforce the learning of new material?
I do one-pagers, I do GIFs, I have them do gallery walks, I have them write on my tables, I have them draw. Anything to be able to show that they mastered something today.
All right, those are really good strategies, and that will help the students remember it because, and you engage them with repeating the information. Okay, so beyond the notes, now we talked about the notes, but the notes have to have a purpose, right? We're teaching this for a reason. We talk about the learning targets. But now, when we ask questions, when we present the vocabulary words or these vocabulary words, we need to be able to move the students from a basic just concept of memorizing and move them from memorizing a concept to actually getting to the point where they can apply what they have been learning, right? So in Avid, they have this thing called the Costas level of thinking, which is very similar to what we are all familiar, which is the DOK, the depth of knowledge. When we ask questions at a very basic level where the students have to define, explain what they have, the vocabularies that they have memorized, and they move through a sequence that goes from the DOK 1 to 2 to 3 to 4s, and when they get to the DOK 4 level, the students are at this point creating something from what they just started learning at DOK 1, right? So the vocabulary words vocabulary or note-taking cannot be an isolated process. It's something that is supposed to connect something that you're learning with something that you can do. And in sciences, it's very easy to do when we do a lab or an activity, a hands-on, something that connects to a phenomena, for example. And the students can add original thinking through this, connecting what they're doing. So when they go back to the notes, they go through a process of inquiry. Okay? I'm gonna skip through this real quick. All right. Phase 4 is summarizing. When you start, okay, so now we went over the notes, we're connecting the thinking, we're summarizing what we're learning. So what have I learned? All right, the students should be able to understand what they're writing to answer the question, what have I learned, and how will this be useful? And we get this all the time. Why are we learning this? Don't you get that question all the time? Why are we learning this? I'm never gonna use this. It does, and in order to avoid that question, you already have to break down the lesson by presenting them with the application of what they're learning. And applying what they're learning. And then this is the last phase from Avid in all these strategies that you can use. My favorite is project-based learning, when you have the student discover things, and then you introduce the vocabulary or the notes as they are discovering things, not as an isolated thing that they're doing. It's all embedded in the project-based learning, but that's not the only way to learn. There is a bunch of other activities or different approaches for learning that you can adapt to your classroom based on your content, based on your own personality. But obviously that there are some that applies more to a content than another, okay? So have the students apply what they have learned. And finally, I have this example of before and after what note-taking looks like using Cornell notes. So Abby has a format of note-taking from Cornell. So if you have never used Cornell notes, you have two columns where you start with questions over here, and then here's where you take your notes. This is where you do your summary, and you start with your guiding question, your assessment question. You'll learn entirely. I can learn the difference between a vector and a scalar, for example. I think the students will be able to take the notes, and like your suggestion is a great suggestion. Just include the vocabulary that they're going to learn from that day in the notes, and as they do whatever instructional strategy you have planned for the student, as they learn this process, they are able to go through these 5 phases that Abbott is suggesting. How are the students connecting what they're learning? Is it relevant for what they're doing? And is it focused? Can they go over this, underline, be able to summarize what they have learned, and create their own questions? So the process of net taking for Abbott, it's a 5-step process, and there are different formats that you can use. We'll share with you guys at the end of the day the OneNote, so you can look at those resources. And if you have any questions, just let me know. Are there any questions? So I think I just finished on time, so I can get you out of here on time. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate you.